Ambition. Is it positive or negative? Or are there also instances in which it can be neutral, especially regarding the pursuit of social justice? In Germany in the 1920s and 30s, a new political party was gaining popularity. Known at the time as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, it was led by its chairperson Anton Drexler, who was more or less a moderate member and leader. This moderacy would have contributed to the rising popularity of the party. The German chancellor of the time was a man named Hermann Müller, who recognized before anyone else the threat this new party posed to the German state. As their propaganda began circulating within the country in the early 30s, Müller felt his power was threatened as chancellor until finally the National Socialist German Workers' Party took power entirely democratically through the election. Their leader, Adolf Hitler, was appointed as Chancellor of Germany on January 30th, 1933. The party would later come to be known as the Nazi Party. The key to their power seize was their persuasive propaganda. Throughout their rise, their politicians and followers were determined to gain power. They knew they must achieve success diplomatically and democratically through the election, so they made it a goal to gain the German people's vote in the election. Their ambition drove them and allowed them to accomplish this goal as they convinced millions of a xenophobia, a fear of people unlike themselves. These people included the Jewish, the Roma, homosexuals, and immigrants. This method of propaganda put fear into the hearts of Germans, which made them desperate for a solution to a problem they didn't have. On March 23, 1933, after their political party had taken parliament, an enabling act was passed, which allowed Hitler power to have all political parties except the Nazi Party banned. During May of the same year, supporters of the Nazi Party began holding huge bonfires where they would burn books. 25,000 books were burned, including the works of such brilliant minds as Einstein, Freud, and Max Brod. It was an attack on intellectual freedom, but this act was supported by Nazi professors and college students. Time magazine called this the Bibliocaust, while the New York Times gave it its trademark name, the Holocaust. The SA was a parliament organization of Nazis that held over 450,000 members by 1933. The SS was the elite guard of the Nazi Party. Both organizations took authority over the Jews, Roma, and all others. These people quickly became outcasts. Jews were made to wear the Star of David and a piece of cloth labeled Jude to tell the world that they were Jewish, which signified inferiority in Germany at the time. Some were taunted by police officers, who had complete control and immunity. These people could not defend themselves or speak back to the officers in fear of arrest, which was entirely justifiable to the German government. Any insubordinates from a Jew was grounds for arrest. Stores led by Jews were labeled as such and in turn shunned by the majority of the population. They eventually had to shut down their businesses due to boycotting from neighbors. Actual Jews were made to parade down streets with a sign around their neck telling the world that they were Jewish. They faced torments and public humiliation from their neighbors, who either agreed with this treatment or were too afraid to speak out. The events unfolding and the treatment of these outcasts quickly escalated. Beatings, bloodshed, and arrests were rising, and Jews were being imprisoned. Jews were taken from their homes in their neighborhoods and forced into Nazi-established settlements called ghettos. By 1939, World War II was beginning as British and other European nations began organizing against the Nazi regime. By 1940, there were over 400 ghettos with over 2 million Jews and 8,000 Roma. Before 1940, Nazis focused on Jewish emigration from Germany. Now, in the beginning of a new decade, the Nazis advanced and
Important thing to take away from this experience.
It's most important. It's probably that, well, to put it in light terms, it's not okay what they did, and that it should have never happened. If people knew about it but didn't do anything about it, that's not how it should have been. People knew about it but didn't do anything, and that's not how it should have worked.
How should that affect us?
It affects us that there's a lot of takeaway from this, the fact that so many people were killed based off their religion, and that just gives you, what's the word? It reminds you of the freedoms you have as an American, I guess.
focused on the final solution, to kill all Jews. There were groups of Nazis referred to as killing squads. The Jews of Germany were rounded up by town, packed onto trains, and sent to larger camps, concentration camps. Here, Jews were stripped of their identities, asked for their age and weight, and tattooed with numbers for identification. This practice dehumanized the prisoners and sorted them completely objectively, whether they were fit to work or not, a process known as selection. Those who were deemed fit, mostly young men between the ages of 18 and 45, were sent to barracks, where they were stripped and given workers' clothes. Those who were unfit, mostly women, elderly people, and children, were considered too weak and sent to either the gas chambers or the fire pits to be killed. The captives were condemned to one of two fates, death or extermination through work. Very few of the Jews knew what was happening as it did. While some were sent one way, the others went another, not knowing that was the last time they would see each other. This was the case for many families. Those who were sent to work in the camps were subject to such harsh labor, many died within the first months they were there. Those who became weak or sick or simply too old during their work were sent to gas chambers, disguised as showers, where they would be stripped and sent hundred by hundred into a room where the doors were then locked behind them. No water fell. Instead, the chambers were filled with gas from Zyklon B pellets, which would slowly poison and kill anyone who breathed the air. When they were all suffocated, they were moved from the chambers and taken to pits, mass graves, by their own fellow prisoners, where their corpses would be burned, unmarked and entirely anonymous. Some of the most notorious concentration camps include Bergen-Belsen, Nordhausen, Buchenwald, Ohrdruf, and of course Auschwitz. Millions of Jews were held here and forced to work, digging ditches and graves, assembling German weapons, and sewing German uniforms. Prized possessions for prisoners included such necessities as spoons, bowls, and other eating utensils. They stole and borrowed and fell into debt over small things. Many were caught robbing the dead of their possessions, clothes, hair, gold teeth fillings, and crowns. But there were no consequences, however, for those who had sunk so low as they had. The commonly known phrase from the Auschwitz camp was the cast iron archway at the entrance, where it was inscribed, Arbeit macht frei, German for work makes you free. This was not true in any case. Arguably,
What would you tell somebody that cannot come here?
I would tell them that it is really impressive what Hitler was able to do to this many people in such a short amount of time, and that it's really amazing what went down in World War II.
What is the most important thing to take away from this experience?
I would say never forgetting. That's what this museum seems to be all about, is looking around and seeing all the artifacts and pictures of people, and it's really keeping it alive today.
How is the presentation of the information affecting you?
It's heavy. Some of the stuff, there are some pictures here that are really emotional, and it gets to you. So
All right, thank you.
one of the most unfortunate tragedies of the Holocaust was the potential help the Americans could have given but didn't. From the late years of 1930 to 1942, the Americans were well aware of the atrocities Jews were going through in Europe as the Nazi regime grew, but they kept people in the dark, not ever letting them know what was occurring overseas. For the Americans, indifference was the most important excuse of staying out of it. They were not being affected by the Nazis. Their Jewish citizens were not suffering. In their minds, in the minds of the president of the time, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and in the minds of the government, they had no part in the Holocaust. This changed with the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. It was an air attack on the naval base Pearl Harbor carried out by the Japanese, an ally of Nazi Germany. By bringing the United States into the war, already 4 years late, the Allies had already been formed. The Allies included nations such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and many European nations who were under Nazi occupation but remained a resistance, like France, Belgium, and Poland. As the United States began becoming more involved in the war, they found that things were worse than they had seemed. While they had the resources, the US and other nations decided against the bombing of the main Auschwitz camp, of which there were 3, deeming it too risky, but instead bombed the smaller camp, called Buna Plant, where Jewish prisoners were forced to manufacture rubber. Bombings such as these became popular, and in one way gave the prisoners hope, while they knew they were still at risk from being killed by one. As Jewish prisoner once stated, "We are no longer afraid of death. At any rate, not of that death. Every bomb that exploded gave us new confidence in life." From November 1942 to May of 1945, Nazi forces had retreated under the rising threat of the Allied forces. From once occupying almost all of Europe, from the borders of France, Norway, Greece, and Finland, German forces withdrew back into the center of Europe until they only held Norway, Denmark, and Germany. With these withdrawals came a last effort to exterminate the Jews who were still prisoners on January 18, 1945. The SS was instructed to empty all concentration camps from Europe and bring them back into Germany. During this march, over 60,000 Jews were escorted from Auschwitz to inner Germany, where more than 15,000 died from disease, starvation, and exhaustion alike. Over the course of 12 years,
What have you learned from the museum?
I think I already had some background knowledge about the Holocaust, so a lot of the facts weren't new. But I think when you go to the Holocaust Museum, it's not about facts; it's about the experiences. It's about being directly put into the spaces that the victims lived. You get to see the bunks. You get to see the clothes they wore. You get to see the small details of the experience, and I think that's the biggest part of the museum.
How is the presentation of the information affecting you?
I think it's very powerful, the way the architecture and the structure of the museum work to sort of give you the visitor a visual experience, and as you walk through each section, it sort of gets darker and sadder, and it's really emotional. I think a lot of people don't expect to have an emotional experience who go there, but it's almost impossible not to. The shadows and the subject matter and just all the visuals, over and over again you see it, and it's hard to get through there quickly, so it takes a long time, and just that experience of over and over again seeing the horror, it's hard not to be really sad at the end.
What is the most important thing to take away from this museum?
It's a very hard question, and I think it's about the way the museum personalizes everything. You really get to see the individual people. There's galleries of pictures of victims, and you can see all the different ages and where they came from, and you see them like skiing and smiling and playing, and you get to see like real actual people, not just numbers. It's a lot of times when you study the Holocaust, you get these huge numbers of people who were killed, and in the museum it really makes it so that you get to see the individual lives of the people. You get to see a room full of shoes, and each one of those pairs of shoes was a life, and I just think it personalizes it. It makes it so that you experience that person.
over the course of 12 years, the Nazi Party rose and fell from the highest power the modern world has seen in recent history. Over these years, millions of Jews and other minority groups were imprisoned, discriminated against, and killed in Hitler's efforts to purify the German race. During this process, millions more died fighting in the war or in an indirect crossfire. As many survivors and historians have agreed, the Allied forces realized the damage much too late. John W. Fell once said to describe American efforts, "What we did was little enough. It was late and little, I would say." Ambition. Is it always positive or negative? Yes. Under no circumstances can ambition be neutral, because ambition will always have an end goal. This goal can either be negative, like in tearing apart a continent and preaching hate to millions as Hitler and his Nazi regime did, or positive, like in sacrificing one's safety and comfort for others as so many resistances and dissidents did. Thousands of those who were unaffected by the discrimination others faced so directly put it to themselves to sacrifice their livelihoods to right a wrong of which they had no part. For years, families took it upon themselves to hide Jews away in basements and attics and hidden rooms to keep them safe from a fate they knew very little about. They must have known it was worth the risk they were making in hiding these people. Their ambition made a difference by thousands. Their bravery set a precedent between the relationship between social justice and compassion, their importance in the face of adversary.